Hello and welcome to our latest Career Clinic webinar. This is going to be recorded and will be made available at a later date. There's also going to be a chance to ask questions throughout the webinar, and today we're joined by the very knowledgeable Dr. Jill Berry. Jill has taught for 30 years across 6 different schools in the UK, and she was a head for the last 10 of those years. Since leaving headship in 2010, she has completed a doctorate, and where she researched the transition to headship. She has also written a book based on her research and experience, Making the Leap, Moving from Deputy to Head, which is available from Crown House. Jill is also a force for good online, and she takes the time to read blogs and articles about education, and she summarises them for us all. So she's doing God's work there. She's a wonderful person to follow on Twitter. I highly recommend that if you don't follow Jill, you should be, and you should be doing it now. And today, Jill is tackling that really tricky topic of CPD. And so I'm now going to pass over to her to begin her presentation. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you very much, Gronya. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here, and many thanks to Gronya and to Tess for inviting me to be part of this event. As Gronya said, I'm a former head, now working in leadership development, so I support serving and aspiring leaders at all levels. I'm very pleased to be talking to you today about effective professional learning and how you can make the most of the opportunities CPD presents. I also want to consider how you can be discriminating where CPD is concerned, so that you make the most of your time and your school's financial resources too. So in this session, I'm going to present for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have 20 minutes to consider any questions you may have. And I'm going to ask you to use the chat facility, please, from time to time to record your thoughts. At the end of the session, we're going to take a copy of all the comments, and I'm going to integrate them anonymously into a written record of our discussion. So these are the questions that we're going to be covering in the first part of the session. Obviously, if there are other aspects of CPD you want to ask about, we can address those in the final 20 minutes. If you have any general questions at any point, please do feel free to put them in the chat box. So we're beginning with this question: what does the best CPD look like? And before we actually start and focus on that, I want to ask you to think about something and to record your responses in the chat stream. And my question is this: when you think about your own continuing professional development and learning, what are you hoping to get from it? What are you trying to achieve? So you might be a primary teacher in the early years of your career. You may feel that some things you've got a handle on, other things you're less sure about. So how does CPD fit into that? What do you want to get from your CPD? Just give you a minute or so to record your thoughts. Thank you. Thanks very much. Do keep contributing if you wish to. I wrote a blog post a few years ago after I'd spoken at an event in the Northeast on the subject of CPD and how professional development was changing over time. I started my career in 1980. Yes, I know, a long time ago. I have to say that CPD just didn't seem to be a thing in the early part of my career. It only seemed to be in the second half of my career, from the 90s onwards, that we began to take professional development seriously. And that's interesting because education research makes clear that the thing that makes the greatest difference to what pupils are able to achieve is the quality of teaching. And it's the quality of teaching. I'm not talking about the quality of teachers. It's not exactly the same. And developing staff has been shown by the research to be the most important and productive activity schools can invest in that leads to the improvement in the quality of teaching. So professional development is really important. It's crucial. For me, the best CPD makes a difference. It makes a difference to your professional practice in such a way that the experience of the pupils and the experience of your colleagues, especially if you're in a leadership role, increases, it improves. Things change, you change as a result of what you learn and the skills you develop. So perhaps your confidence builds. Ideally, your enjoyment of your job may grow as you increase your mastery, whether that's to do with teaching and learning, with pastoral care and support, with leadership, any aspect of your job that you're keen to strengthen. And the pupils and perhaps other staff benefit as a result of your learning. So that, to me, is what's really important about continuing professional development and learning. Evidence again suggests that the best CPD is very much focused on your practice. It's more likely to be school-based than about going away on a course and coming back with new knowledge. The best CPD, research suggests, is relevant, it's appropriate to your particular needs, perhaps to your professional context. Ideally, it motivates, lifts, and inspires you, and it leads to changed behaviour and improvement. Tom Sherrington, in a recent blog post, I'll give you the reference at the end of the PowerPoint, talks about the limitations of blanket CPD, where everyone is herded together and given the same training irrespective of their needs. He also suggests that even things like health and safety or child protection and safeguarding updates, which we do need from time to time, there are better ways to do this than just gathering the whole staff together in the hall and speaking at them. So if you're interested in that, have a look at the blog post and see what he has to suggest about how we can make CPD as effective as possible. So before I go on to the next question, just think, is there anything additional you would like to say in the chat thread about what success in CPD terms means to you? Just type it now. Thank you. So moving on to the next question, which is about taking control and actively seeking out opportunities to develop. Again, before I tell you what I think about this, I'd like you to pause and reflect. Can you think of a time where you took control of your CPD, where you showed initiative, where you consciously activated something which led to effective professional learning, which made a difference to you? If you can think of a specific example, can you record it now in the chat? Just tell us exactly what you did that was an example of you taking charge. My view is that we all need to take responsibility for our own development rather than seeing ourselves as passive consumers who simply wait for others to present us with CPD opportunities. If you choose to read a book about education, and I've suggested a few that you might think about later on in the PowerPoint, things you might find interesting and useful, you're taking control. If you use social media, such as Twitter, to engage with other educators, to learn from them and contribute to their learning, you're showing initiative. If you read blogs, and especially if you decide to write blog posts of your own, you're actively seeking out opportunities to reflect, to share, and to learn. If you instigate a conversation, if you ask for advice, if you ask to observe someone or to be observed in order to learn and build your professional skills, you're taking charge. And obviously, if you voluntarily attend an event face-to-face, or at the moment perhaps online, something like this event, or you choose to listen to an education podcast, you are taking responsibility for your own development. So before we move on, if anything has occurred to you that you didn't record before, which you realise now is an example of you taking control of CPD, please feel free to type it in the chat box now. So my view is that we need to take responsibility, not just for engaging in CPD, but ensuring that it does make a difference. The fact that you do something obviously doesn't mean it's going to make an impact. So if you read something, if you watch or listen to something, if you attend an event, what is it that ensures it does make a difference and it doesn't just wash over you? Because I do understand that sometimes, even if we go through training or we read something or we listen to something that we feel enthusiastic about, once we get back into the classroom, our good intentions can evaporate because we're overwhelmed by what Maggie Farrer at the National College used to call the tyranny of stuff, which can knock us back sometimes. So can you think about what you personally would do to make sure that some professional learning you had engaged in did actually make a difference to your professional practice? What do you think you do? Either in the chat box or in the question box or wherever you want to record it. If you can think of an example of what you do so that you are actually engaging and discovering new ways of doing things. I think this is all about reflection. I think it's about the thinking that happens during and especially afterwards. It's about the questions you ask yourselves and what you do as a result of the answers you give yourself. So what have I learned here? What difference is that going to make? What might I do more of or less of? What might I start? What might I stop? How is this relevant to my context, my current skills? How is it relevant to the areas in which I want to build my confidence and expertise? And often talking about that learning with other people is the way you clarify your thinking. Somebody said, how do I know what I think unless I hear what I say? And I can understand that. So in a way, it's about checking for understanding. Tom Sherrington, in the post I mentioned, is really good in this. Just as we check for understanding with pupils, we need to go through that process ourselves to absorb and internalize what we're learning and to consider how we might act on developing understanding, new knowledge, new skills. It partly depends on how self-aware you are. Do you fully understand where you are strong and how you can make the absolute best of your strengths? Do you give yourself credit for the progress you're making, the things you're developing? I took part in a TEDx event in Norwich last summer, and there's a recording of my 10-minute TEDx talk. You can Google it, just Jill Berry TEDx, it should come up. It was about seeing the best in yourself and others, and that includes the children that you teach. You can't get the best from people unless you can see the best, including yourself. And sometimes giving yourself credit for good stuff and ensuring you're making the most of that is really important. It's called appreciative inquiry. I talk about it a lot. It's about getting further by recognizing what's working and doing more of it, rather than always focusing on what's broken and how can we fix it. So where are you strong? Where could you be even stronger, and who can help you along the way? I absolutely believe that the best teachers are those who are committed to becoming better teachers. And I don't think you would be taking part in this webinar if that wasn't true of you, unless someone is literally holding a gun to your head as you sit at the laptop. I hope that's not the case. I think the best leaders are dedicated to becoming better leaders. The ones who think they've cracked it, trust me, they haven't. I'm still learning about education and leadership. It's over 40 years since I first set foot in a classroom to teach my first lesson. So think about how you can make sure you are properly engaging with the learning. And the next point is that you really don't want to waste your time. You certainly don't want to waste your money or anyone else's money. So how do you know whether something is going to be worthwhile before you actually invest in it? And I'm going to be really honest here and say that sometimes I know you may be put in a situation where training is presented to you, it isn't your choice, and you might feel it's of questionable value. There may be times when that happens, but I read a book called Teacher in the Cupboard by Lisa Jane Ashers a few years ago. And she said, I thought this was really interesting. She's determined to get the best she can, the most she can from any training opportunity, whatever the quality. And I thought if you're in that situation, that's actually a very positive and constructive approach to take. So if you are actively looking for what you can learn, often there is something there, even if you're not over impressed with the presentation or some of the content. I'll give you the reference to Lisa's book at the end of the PowerPoint. Ideally, I don't want that to happen often. I want you to have a choice and to make a thoughtful and considered decision about what you spend your time and money on, so that it connects to your own particular needs and it actively helps you to become even better at your job and to get more from it. So achieve more, enjoy it more. Again, this relies on you knowing yourself and being honest about where you need to improve your skills. And then enlisting the support of leaders and colleagues who can actually help and advise you. Find out what you can about different learning opportunities, ask for other people's opinions, read reviews, share questions on Twitter. What should you be reading, watching, listening to? Are you a podcast fan? There is a lot of material online, especially as a result of lockdown, and some of it is superb. Now, I know there's a lot and it can be overwhelming, but firstly, seeing what others might recommend, especially those whose views you know you really respect and value. And secondly, having a focus. What is it you're really trying to improve or develop? If you're clear about that, I want to increase my confidence in this area. Can people suggest who should I be talking to? What should I be observing? What could I be reading, listening to, watching? So be discriminating, and with online resources, it's good to dip in for 5-10 minutes and find out, is this something that will actually help me in the particular area I want to focus on? So I'm going to finish with a few recommendations of things I think you might find useful. This is the blog, the post on my blog about how CPD has changed and is continuing to change, which you may find interesting. This is the Tom Sherrington post about how CPD needs to be flexible in order to be more effective. And Mark Anderson has written a lot about Twitter, Twitter for teachers, for networking, for sharing, for learning. And that's one of his posts. If you don't yet use Twitter, my advice is to find a teacher who does and just sit down with them with their laptop or their tablet or whatever and get them to show you how they use it, why they use it, what they get from it. I know so many people who've said Twitter has transformed my professional practice, and judiciously used, it will save you time. I also want to recommend magazines and journals. I hope you subscribe to Test magazine. I think there's some brilliant stuff in it. I tweet from it at the weekend. If you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen that. I think I felt I'd grown up as an educator when I started to read the articles rather than just looking at the jobs pages. So reading Test magazine, I would recommend. If you're a member of the Chartered College, you will already get the Impact Journal, which is brilliant at reporting on education research and showing how it can help the practitioner in the classroom. If you're not a member, I'd strongly recommend you join. And in terms of building your subject knowledge, because we need to continually develop that, which organisations could you join? Will the school pay your subscription fee? Some schools will. What subject-specific publications might you read? In terms of books, Doug Lamont's Teach Like a Champion 2 is the book I wish I'd had when I embarked on my teaching career. I think it's brilliant. This is Teacher in the Cupboard I mentioned, about Lisa Jane Asher's, talking about how to make the most from all CPD. John Tate's Teaching Rebooted, it's out relatively recently, and it's practical, it's concise, it's a good summary of lots of different teaching techniques and how they might help. And the Making Every Lesson Count series, it started with this book by Sean Allison and Andy Tharby, but there are lots of subject specialist versions of it as well. I'm an English teacher, I was an English teacher. Andy Tharby wrote Making Every English Lesson Count, which is, I think, the best book about English teaching that I've ever read. The final question I want to ask you, I hope you can contribute something either in the chat box or the question box, but this is the so what, now what question. And this is all about processing your learning, reflecting, and asking yourself, what am I going to do as a result of what I've been thinking about? I've said 45 minutes, but actually it's 25. We've got the questions to come. But as a result of your reflections in this session, what might you do that you might not have done had you just been sitting on the settee with the gin for the last half an hour? You can do that later. Some of you, I'm sure, will. So can you record one thing, one commitment in the chat box or the question stream that is your commitment to doing something differently? And again, I will use those, I'll anonymise them, but I'll use those examples when I pull the summary together.
Thank you so much, Jill. We'll jump in with the questions. So somebody has asked, do you have any advice for using Twitter responsibly without it becoming an unhealthy habit? How do you switch off?
I think you make choices about when you're going to engage and when you're not. I think with anything electronic, I would always say you need to control it rather than letting it control you. So I don't want pings and whistles on my phone telling me when messages are coming in. I want to decide when I've got maybe half an hour, I'm going to sit down and check Twitter, and then I'll close it down. I think Twitter holidays are useful. I think sometimes in holidays you want to not even think about education for a while. You just need to relax and refresh. So think, I'm not going to go on education Twitter for the next couple of weeks. I'm just going to have a break from it. It will still be there when you're ready. So you just have to have some parameters, I think, some lines that you draw and say, I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to let it drive me. And I think the same with many things in life, really. You need to take control of when you're going to engage.
It's quite interesting. When I realised that I could see how many hours I spent on Twitter when I looked at my battery app, that was a sobering moment. That's a good way to keep yourself in check, and it tells you each week how many hours you spent on different apps that week. It's I won't tell you how much.
I think I'd be horrified, Grania. I mean, I'm not doing a job in a school now. I'm doing part-time consultancy work. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, but I enjoy it. I find it useful. I find it productive. I learn a lot from it, so I don't have a problem with it. But I think very few people would use Twitter as much as I do. But it's about deciding what you're comfortable with. And if you're using Twitter, are you neglecting other things? Are you on your phone tweeting when you ought to be having a conversation with somebody or listening to somebody? That's when I think you need to recalibrate a bit. But Twitter for learning, for CPD, I think is exceptionally good. But yes, you need to control it.
I like to think the things that I found on Twitter that saved me time, like people that share past papers or marking tips or directing you somewhere, that I've somehow, in the long term, I clawed that time back. It's fine. Okay, another question. Geography teacher, they're in a rural secondary school. How would you recommend that they go about starting a network with other local schools? So you mentioned that, networking with other schools is a really good way to get that decent CPD for all sorts of reasons. But what if you're the only geography teacher in the village? What if there's not another secondary school for miles around? How do you do that?
Again, I think this is where social media is useful, because if you are geographically remote, you can make connections with other specialists, and it doesn't matter where they are. Even overseas, you can connect with them. So I think that's really useful. But a lot of people, they like face-to-face contacts as well. They like cluster groups of specialists that they can actually talk to and build a face-to-face relationship with. It's obviously difficult at the moment because of COVID. But I think certainly, I would say anyone wanting to do that, in the first instance, I'd talk to the head or the senior team and say, I'd like to contact local schools to suggest that we put together a subject group, and perhaps we can meet, or perhaps at the moment we can just set up Zoom or Teams or Google Meet so that we can actually just talk about some issues. I think it's more useful if you have a focus, so there are specific questions you're wanting to explore, and you can find people who are interested in exploring those questions together. It's interesting, I remember Alex Quigley, when he was at Huntingdon in York, once saying that the answer to the problem you're grappling with may be in the classroom on the other side of the corridor, but you will never know that unless you have a conversation with that person. So sometimes there are things that cross subject boundaries, but you need to be having professional learning conversations with your colleagues. But certainly in other local schools or on social media more broadly, it's a really good idea. I don't think with technology as it is, anyone should feel isolated. Hope that helps.
I've got a question here from a trainee teacher, so someone who's still doing their ITT, they're still training at the moment, and they ask, is it too early to start thinking of CPD at this point in your career? So they've just got into the classroom. It's the 21st of September today, so they've been in there for a few weeks. Should they be making CPD a focus right now in the first term of their teacher training?
I think if you put it another way, should you make learning a focus, then the answer is clearly yes, always, because we're all learning all the time. I think one of the mistakes we've made in the past is that people equate CPD with going for promotion. and going off on courses and readying yourself for the next job. I don't think there's anything wrong as a training teacher or a beginning teacher in starting to formulate your views about where your career might develop over time. But CPD is just about learning, building on the good stuff, plugging the gaps, building your confidence. And I would say there's quite a lot of that happens anyway during your teacher training experience. And that's the start of a long journey. So it's never too early to think about how you can gain from developing yourself as a professional.
I completely agree. I mean, I think about some of the CPD I had and sought out when I was a trainee teacher, and I used that for the 10 years that I was in the classroom. I used it every day. It's never too early, really. You just got to be careful about what you pick, which leads into my next question I've just got in. So another trainee, and he asks, how do you choose which area you should focus on? Have you got any recommendations? So as a trainee teacher, where should they be looking first?
I think it's very personal, really. It depends where you feel confident and where you feel less secure. And where you feel confident, you've got something to contribute to other people's professional learning. So if you're in a department where there are several specialists, or in a primary school where you're having staff meetings and sharing ideas, you can support other people. But you need to think, actually, when I'm teaching that subject or that part of my subject, or it might be to do with behaviour management, or it might be to do with any number of things, you think, actually, that is something where I think I need to feel more secure and confident. So again, we go back to the blanket CPD thing, and I've organised blanket CPD. You know, I've got everyone together, and we've done training on dyslexia or well-being or whatever. And I think these days people are a little bit more aware that everybody needs to develop. CPD isn't optional, but you need to have choices within it that actually match up with your particular needs, your context, your personality, your skills, your confidence. It's about being self-aware and really knowing yourself and identifying that's something I need to find out more about. Just tell you a quick example of what not to do. When you go to a conference and there are different workshops and you choose what to go to, it was fairly late in my career that I realised I always chose something that I was already interested in and probably quite good at. And I didn't choose the things that I probably should have chosen because I didn't think I'd find them so interesting. So I never chose the joy of spreadsheets, and maybe I should have done. So it's about thinking that isn't a strength, so I need to go along and find out more, rather than, oh, actually, I'm really interested in that, so I'm going to go to that, and you know, it'll be great. So don't do what I did, folks.
It's exactly the same as kids when they revise, though. When you say to a student, you know, you need to start your revision, what are you going to start with? And they'll always begin with the thing they're the best at, because they enjoy it more when they revise the things they already know. And it is the same with CPD. I mean,
as long as you begin that way and then move on, Grania, if that makes you feel more confident and more comfortable, but don't just stick in your comfort zone. We all need to be out of our comfort zone from time to time.
Yeah, I think when I was a trainee, I spent lots of time doing CPD on classroom management, which actually I like sitting there and feeling quite smug, like I can do this. My kids are all right for me, but I should have spent all my time doing the subject knowledge stuff because that's what I really needed to have been working on.
Yeah, learn from our example, everyone.
Okay. Oh, this is a good question. So, when you're filling in application forms, which a lot of early teachers are at this point thinking about when they're coming to apply for their first jobs or first NQT jobs, or even the first job after being an NQT, should you put every piece of CPD on your CV?
No. My advice to people applying for jobs is to use the phrase recent and relevant professional development includes, and then select from any CPD you've done what is most recent and relevant to the job you're applying for. Because obviously the longer your career goes on, the longer the list becomes, but some of it you think actually that isn't going to be something that they're particularly impressed by or interested in because it's not so relevant to this job. So for example, if you apply for a leadership role, you need to recognise that that is the focus. You're trying to show you are ready to step into a leadership role. So you need to think which of your recent professional development is most compelling and most persuasive. Don't feel the longer the list, the better. I think you need to be selective and discriminating here in what you include. And if you can't think of anything recent and relevant to support your application, perhaps it's a bit early to apply, and you need to think about the professional development that you undertake in order to prepare yourself for making that step.
It's pause for thought, that point on the application, isn't it? But that question was from Sarah, so thank you, Sarah. I've got a question now from Abigail. She asks, to what extent would you say it is important to take on board the advice of senior colleagues about your CPD choices, and to what extent should it be self-led? So
yeah, a good question, Abby, thank you. I think it needs to be both. It depends on the relationship you have with those who lead you. I hope it's a good relationship. I hope they know you well. I hope they're really good at getting the balance of support and constructive challenge. So sometimes they are nudging you out of your comfort zone because they know that's what you need. But I also hope they're listening to you and what you are interested in, what you're passionate about, what you want to develop. So I think it's both. And I think sometimes you help people make a guided choice so that they don't just avoid things they actually need to look at and cling to the things that they find interesting or easy or whatever. But it's a kind of negotiation, and I think really both of those things have their place in this.
Phil's got a really good question. He asks, is there any piece of CPD that sticks as a watershed moment or has had the biggest influence on your practice?
I think for me, it was probably, and I know this is a long way off for some of you, but in the early years of my career, I used to say I didn't want to be a head teacher. And one of the things I would say to you is never say never, because you don't know. You want different things at different times. And I think it was when I became a deputy head and I started to look at preparation for headship, and I just felt really excited. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I know it's going to be hard, but the training that I did and the reading and the preparation that I did convinced me that actually this was a very appealing next step. And it was partly about challenging myself because I didn't know whether I could do it, but I really wanted to have the opportunity. So ideally, you should feel fired up and lifted by training rather than just ground down and depressed. And I think it can help you be more aware of what it is you need in order to be fulfilled in your career. And that's what I would wish for all of you, that you do find satisfaction and fulfillment. And sometimes that's from taking on things that are difficult and you don't yet know whether you're capable. But I quote Robert Quinn, who said, you build the bridge as you walk on it. You learn how to do a job from doing the job. And that's exciting and energizing and sometimes terrifying, but that's all part of the package.
The next question is actually something that I found really useful for my CPD. So they've asked about marking. So it was a bit of a long one. They said that their NQT mentor last year encouraged them to sign up to do exam marking for CPD, but obviously didn't get a chance because of what happened in the summer. They're feeling really nervous about doing it this year because they've missed out so much time, the NQT being cut short. Do you think exam marking is good CPD for someone with my experience? They teach history and would be marking GCSE history.
I think it is good experience. I don't know whether it's still the case. When I started teaching, you had to have 3 full years teaching under your belt before you could apply to be an examiner. So I applied in year 4 and I marked GCSE every year until after I stopped being a head of department. And it was especially helpful when I was a head of department because I would mark GCSEs that we were taking. But it is about priorities, and you may feel at the moment that it isn't a priority for you. So you decide whether you want to do that now, whether you'd rather use your development time on other things. But it's good that people encourage you. It's good that they talk about your career aspirations. But if you feel pressured into doing something that you're not comfortable with, you need to be assertive enough to say, not now. So not no, never, not now, not yet. So decide what you think is the best investment of your time at this stage in your career.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. It sometimes depends on what your team leader is like when you're marking. And the good thing about marking, of course, is that you can drop out when it does get too much, and it's so useful to do. I found it transformative when I was teaching, and I wish I'd done it earlier. But equally, I can see why it is quite a nerve-wracking thing, because these people are people's qualifications, aren't they?
They are, but it's you're trained, your marking is moderated, you're not completely on your own, you're part of a supportive group. So it's interesting and it's useful. I'm pleased I did it. But again, it's about timing, and it's about, I might learn from that, but I think there are other things that I need to do at this moment that I'd learn more from. So you have to make some decisions yourself.
Oh, I've got an interesting international question. So somebody who is from Belgrade in Serbia, and they have been teaching for 15 years, so not a newbie. However, the opportunities for CPD for teachers there are really limited. How can they access CPD from the UK without emptying the bank, or even help organise some? So they would like to get more involved with organising CPD. They're from Serbia, not a lot there. How can they get involved with UK CPD?
I mean, this is where, again, technology should help tremendously. I've been very involved in Women Ed, which is a grassroots organisation to encourage serving and aspiring women educators. And they've now got lots of international groups. It's a worldwide organisation. So I think using Twitter and social media to try to connect with other people. Interestingly, over the summer, I did several sessions with the Teacher Development Trust, which they were offering webinars. They were offering for free at the time. This is free too, Grania, isn't it? So there are free webinars and sessions that you can tap into. Obviously overseas, sometimes it depends on the time zone difference or whatever, but there's a lot out there. If it were me, I'd want to go onto Twitter and I'd want to be asking people, this is my situation, this is what I want to learn about. Who should I be following? What should I be watching, listening to? The world is a lot smaller than it used to be. So very best wishes. And I really hope that by engaging with other educators online, you will find it opens doors and tells you about opportunities that you didn't previously know about.
It was Tiana who asked that question. So
thank you, Tiana.
I'm going to assume that is a woman, and I'm sure Women Ed would be very interested in her getting in contact and having a Serbia branch and looking at making her part of the Women Ed family.
It may already exist. I mean, there are lots of different Women Ed international groups now. But just obviously just get in touch with me through the blog, through the email, through Twitter, Tanya, and I'll help you if I possibly can. You don't have to be on your own anymore, because there are networks that can be refreshing and supportive. And one of the great things, I think, is that if you are involved in those networks, everybody gives as well as gains. So you will make recommendations to other people as well as benefiting from their recommendations. Everybody has something to contribute. It doesn't matter whether you're a training teacher, a beginning teacher, whether you've been teaching 15 years, so you're mid-career, or you're at the other end of it like me. You've got something to contribute, and there are ways you can benefit. And that's why it's an amazing thing to be part of. I did write a blog about sustaining yourself mid-career, because I do think 10, 15 years in can be a bit of a dip if you're not careful. And I think CPD is absolutely vital then, because professional development and networking or mentoring or whatever you might do is a way of refreshing and re-energizing yourself at that particular point in your career, so that you feel you can keep going and you're enjoying your job and embracing new opportunities. So CPD is important at all stages.
And Tiana says, thank you, that was very useful advice. And she is a woman, and we did pronounce her name right. So wonderful on both counts.
Thank you. Thank
right.
you.
We'll wrap it up there. Thank you everybody who has taken part, and all the wonderful questions and the comments that you've sent in to us. It's lovely to read them, and I love this part. We fire all the questions at Jill. And thank you so much, Jill, for doing this. It's
It's been
wonderful
a pleasure.
to hear.
Thank you for asking me.
And
Good.
I hope that you can come and join in our webinars again, and I hope that everyone watching signs up to more of them. And remember, you can watch this again later, and Jill's got bits that she's going to be sending out to you, so keep an eye out for those. Have a lovely evening and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.